The first story, as I mentioned, is Nancy Pelosi now wants to unveil this 9/11 style commission that's going to be investigating the Capitol Hill riots. And if you've been following the channel for some period of time, we've been analyzing this. We've been really sort of breaking it down. I want to know who was responsible for maintaining the security and where were those lapses. We talked about Mayor Bowser. She sent a letter on January 5th, the day before the Capitol Hill riots, and she said specifically, we don't need any more help. Then we learned shortly thereafter that there was Stephen Sund from the Capitol Hill Police. He resigned, and there was a lot of finger pointing both directions. And so now that we're going to be, kind of having this quote independent body looking into things, I'm not so sure that that is a bad thing, right? I think it's better for everybody to really get down into what happened here. And so Nancy Pelosi, as the Speaker of the House, as the person who's in charge of the House of Representatives, they're coming out and saying, we're going to move forward with this thing. So let's break this down because the Republicans are responding. And it's going to be a lot of investigations. Everybody's going to be investigating everybody, layers like Inception of investigation. So that'll be fun. This story comes over from the AP. Pelosi said the commission will investigate and report on the facts. She sent a letter over to Democratic colleagues. We're going to go through that here briefly. And it says that investigations into the riot were already planned with the Senate hearings scheduled later this month in the Senate Rules Committee. So this will be separate and apart from that. Right now, it sounds like Pelosi already has something underway. She asked, and we're going to get into this because one of the Republicans, I think Jason Chaffetz or Jim Collins or who is it? Jim Jordan in the House has basically said that this was sort of misconduct, but Nancy Pelosi asked retired Army Lieutenant General Russell Honore to lead an immediate review of the Capitol's security process. So that was something that was already underway. And then yesterday, Nancy Pelosi came out and said that they want to bring forward this bigger style commission, something that is more permanent. We're going to go through her letter. Lawmakers from both parties speaking on Sunday's news shows signaled even more inquiries were likely. The Senate verdict on Saturday, 57-43, failing to impeach Donald Trump a second time, #historical. There should be a complete investigation about what happened, said Senator Bill Cassidy, one of the 7 Republicans who voted to convict Trump. And I'm all for that. I think that that's great. I also would like to know more about what happened. An independent commission along the lines, according to AP, of the one that investigated September 11th would probably require legislation to create, which is good news because the Democrats have control of the House of Representatives, of the Senate, and of the White House. So that means that if they wanted to push this legislation through, they could do that, and then presumably nobody could stop them. So hopefully they are sincere about that. They're going to move this thing forward. That would elevate the investigation a step higher, offering a definitive government-backed accounting of the events. Such a panel would pose risks, though, of sharpening partisan divisions. I don't think those are going to get any worse, or overshadowing President Joe Biden's legislative agenda, which they knew that was a potential, and they decided to run forward with this stuff anyway. So now we've got Nancy Pelosi's letter. Let's take a look. This was released yesterday, February 15th. It says, "Dear colleague, security, security, security. Today, we celebrate the birthdays of America's 2 greatest presidents." Yesterday, of course, was President's Day, and she goes through George Washington was a patriarch of our country, which is kind of a bad thing these days, but she goes on, talks about how great that was. Abraham Lincoln saved the country from division. We got it. Our country is best with great patriotism, and these presidents, we got it. And now we are grateful for the great patriotism of our impeachment managers under the leadership of Congressman Jamie Raskin. What? It goes from Washington to Lincoln to Jamie Raskin, who was doing an excellent job defending our democracy and honoring our Constitution. Okay, there you go. So whatever you think about that, that's fine. Now, as always, security is the order of the day. The security of our country, Capitol, and which is the temple of our democracy, and the security of our members. For the past few weeks, General Honore has been assessing our security needs by reviewing what happened on January 6th and how we must ensure that it does not happen again. He has been working with committees of jurisdiction and will continue to make proposals. It is clear from his findings and from the impeachment trial that we must get to the truth of how this happened to protect our security, our security, our security. That's not a mistake. Our next step will be to establish an outside, independent 9/11 type commission to, quote, investigate and report on the facts and causes relating to the January 6, 2021 domestic terrorist attack upon the United States Capitol complex and relating to the interference with the peaceful transfer of power, including facts and causes related to the preparedness and response of the United States Capitol Police and other federal, state, and local law enforcement in the National Capital Region. So you see how that's in quotes there. So maybe that is going to be a part of her legislation. She says, as we prepare for the commission, it is also clear from General Honore's interim reporting that we must put forth a supplemental appropriation to provide for the safety of members and the security of the Capitol. So if you break that down again, it says that they want to investigate, of course, the Capitol Hill attack, the Capitol Hill riots, relating to the interference of the peaceful transfer of power, including the facts and causes relating to the preparedness and the response of the U.S. government. So I think that's a pretty reasonable scope, actually, right? I mean, that's kind of what we've been clamoring for here. What happened? Why were they so unprepared? If the FBI and a lot of the law enforcement agencies, if everybody on the media was talking about this, Trump, MAGA people are insane maniacs, well, then why weren't they more prepared? If they knew that Donald Trump had been saying, get down there on that particular day, there's going to be a wild rally, and he was making all those claims, you would imagine that our intelligence apparatus, the security force of this country that is entirely in existence to prevent against this type of stuff, you would imagine that somebody at the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, Capitol Hill Police, Metro Police, anywhere would have said, okay, maybe we got to just kind of bolster up security a little bit. If that didn't happen, why not? Who is responsible for it? And it sounds like what Nancy Pelosi is doing is now wanting to form this commission that will focus on including the facts and causes related to the preparedness and the response. So I'm actually okay with that. That sounds pretty good. We will be forever grateful to the Capitol Police for their life-saving courage and heroism in securing the Capitol and protecting its members. Here on that. I thank those of you who have signed on as co-sponsors for the legislation honoring the Capitol Police officer and other law enforcement. We go forward. George Washington, patriarch of our country and the savior of our country, Abraham Lincoln. What, she forgot to put Raskin in there. What is Raskin? He is the impeachment manager who saved America. So that's great. All right. So that's Nancy Pelosi. That's what she wants. Not a lot of details there. Just sort of just kind of a little bit of a framework, a little bit of a skeleton, but hopefully we'll be able to put some more meat on those bones so we can really understand what is the nature of this commission. What is the extent of the scope? And I've got some questions about it that I'll share with you when we get there. But next, I want to talk about the Republicans. So they're responding. Nancy she put out a press release yesterday saying, we want this commission in place, and the Republicans fired right back. They said here in this letter from the Congress of the United States on February 15th, same day, also yesterday, Dear Speaker Pelosi. So they just drafted this puppy and fired it right back. The American people deserve answers to a few straightforward questions regarding the security. Number one, when then Chief Sund made a request for National Guard support on January 4th. Why was that request denied? Oh, good question. Why was that denied? Did the Sergeant at Arms, Paul Irving, get permission or instruction from your staff on January 4th prior to denying Chief Sund's request for the National Guard? Another good question. What conversations and what guidance did you and your staff give the Sergeant at Arms leading up to January 6th, specific to the security posture of the campus? So basically, where was Pelosi in any of this? We're going to go on. It says, what conversations did you have during the attack on the Capitol, and what response did you give security officials on January 6th when Steve Sund requested National Guard support that required your approval? So apparently she's kind of a bottleneck in this entire process. If you want to go and request additional support from the National Guard, it sounds like at some point you got to go through Pelosi. What conversations did she have about that, about giving clearance for the National Guard? Did she approve it or not? Why are your House officers refusing to comply with preservation and production requests to turn over request materials relevant to the events of January 6th? 5 weeks have passed since the attack, and many important questions about your responsibility for the security of the Capitol remain unanswered. This is interesting. As you are aware, the Speaker of the House is not only the leader of the majority party, but also has enormous institutional responsibilities. The Speaker is responsible for all operational decisions made within the House. We have observed for 2 years this very heavy-handed and tightly controlled approach to House operations that has been exerted by yourself, your staff, and an army of appointed House officials. And so all operational decisions is what these Republican congresspeople are saying. In the wake of an attack, there were many calls from members on both sides to conduct a full bipartisan and bicameral review. Republicans have introduced a bill to establish a structure for this review, identify failures, ensure the Capitol is never violently breached again. Instead of working together, you decided unilaterally to fire then Sergeant at Arms Paul Irving, demand the resignation of then Chief of Capitol Police Chief Steve Sund, which we have talked about a lot on this channel, and appointed retired General Russell Honore to lead a security review. These decisions were made in a partisan manner without any consultation of House Republicans, and therefore raise questions about the political motivations of your decisions. All right, well, so that doesn't set really a good precedent on a bipartisan independent commission, but maybe that will change when this is fleshed out. This letter continues. It has been widely reported and confirmed by multiple sources that when Chief Sund requested the National Guard be activated ahead of the January 6th joint session of Congress, the response from the Sergeant at Arms acting on your behalf, which is new information, was that, quote, the optics of having the National Guard on site were not good and the intelligence didn't support the move. So if this is true, you got two big problems with that, right? Number one, why is Nancy Pelosi, through the Sergeant at Arms, not allowing National Guard to come on site? And number two, what happened with our intelligence communities? If they didn't support the move, why not? Just prior to that, to January 6th, we had news here. I think we briefly touched on it on this show, where some of the Proud Boys people were being arrested. The FBI out there, Stephen, whatever his last name was out sort of giving this press conference. We're prepared. We got security. We have all of, we're already making arrests. We told you about these domestic terrorists for a long time, and now we're taking action. A couple days go by, everybody kind of forgets about those arrests because of what happened on the 6th. So if our intelligence agencies didn't understand this, and there were already requests from the chief of police to activate the National Guard ahead of January 6th. What the heck happened? I mean, this is a catastrophic failure, in my opinion, just across the board on multiple different levels. It sounds like there was some request for support. It was largely denied, ignored, or we're going to hopefully find out. But these are good questions. The request was not approved. Furthermore, on January 6th, in the middle of the attack on the Capitol, Chief Sund again notified the Sergeant at Arms of his request for approval to authorize the National Guard. It took over an hour for his request to be approved because the Sergeant at Arms had run the request up the chain of command, which undoubtedly included you and your designees. All right, so this is also interesting. One of the chief complaints that we saw during the impeachment proceedings was that Donald Trump was fiddling while Rome burned, right? Nero fiddled while Rome burned. I think that's the quote. And, Donald Trump apparently was not fast enough. He didn't tweet fast enough. He was not responsive to the crisis at hand. And the Democrats in the impeachment proceedings had a very sort of delineated timeline. And they said, look, he was tweeting this, he was tweeting that. And then suddenly we get one of these videos that comes out. And so they were just kind of saying that this was an extended period of time. Well, Nancy Pelosi, if she does really and truthfully control the Sergeant of Arms, and she's responsible for sort of answering questions about providing additional resources in an emergency, and she didn't do that for over an hour, what is my opinion on that? I think it's probably with good reason, right? She probably was evacuating and there was madness, there was chaos. Nobody expected anything like this. Nobody really knew what was going on. And so I think in the midst of an ongoing emergency like this, you got to cut her some slack. The Democrats, though, didn't do that with Donald Trump. They said he should have apparently just kind of flown in from a helicopter, parachuted in and said, stop this madness, and that would have solved the problem. It's like, hey, you have to understand that when the whole world is sort of crumbling around you, it's going to take some time to get your bearings straight. And especially if you're one of these people at a higher up position, they may have thought that they were personally under attack. They may have been secluded from other individuals. And so we're going to give everybody a little bit of a break on that. Right in the immediate aftermath, I think everybody gets a pass for a delay in response. It's madness. The normal chain of command is kind of broken up. Nobody was expecting it. And so let's give them the benefit of the doubt, both Donald Trump and Nancy Pelosi, in my opinion. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't, after the fact, go in and identify where some of these problems were, which I think is highly warranted. We'll see how that happens, though. This letter continues, couple more slides. On January 7th, you held a press conference in which you stated in part that you were calling on Chief Son to resign because, quote, he hasn't called us since this happened. That claim is refuted by Chief Son, who in a letter to you dated February 1st, 2021, detailed 2 occasions that he briefed you on the situation on the Capitol campus. The first occurring at 5:36 p.m., the second at 6:25, both on January 6th. So apparently, that he did have a conversation with them. While there is widespread support to conduct an independent security review of the campus, General Russell Honore was appointed solely by you without consultation with the minority. To the general's credit, he has reached out to several Republicans to brief on his work to date. We are hopeful this review will be beneficial in recommendations that are not influenced by political motivations. We'll see about that. However, it is easy to understand why we and our Senate counterparts remain skeptical that any of his final recommendations will be independent and without undue influence from you. In addition, we are very concerned by the obstruction and inability to preserve information from your House officers when requested. So this is also something that we see a lot that happens in the law. Typically, if you're in a situation where you are going to be going and requesting evidence, and so an example that we use in criminal law is in, let's say, somebody goes out for a bachelorette party, right? They go out to Old Town Scottsdale where there's a lot of bars, a lot of activity, dancing, music, food, the whole thing. And they're out there and there is a bar fight. Something happens. It's madness. You know how those bachelorettes get. It's wild out there. Not as wild as the Capitol Hill riots, but close. And so when they're out there in Old Town going bananas, something happens. Somebody gets arrested. And we don't really know what happened. And the police, the way that it works there is they kind of like what happened at the Capitol Hill riots, is they just start rounding everybody up. Right? Actually, that didn't really happen at the Capitol Hill riots. They're rounding up everybody up after the fact. In Old Town Scottsdale, it happens right away. So they just kind of go in, they scoop everybody up, they throw them in the back of police vehicles, take them all down to court, and they figure you're going to sort this stuff out the next day. All right. Well, how do we do that? Well, one of the things that we want to do is get the body camera footage from the police. We want to get the surveillance footage from the establishment. We want to get any cell phone footage that was confiscated from people. And we want to preserve that evidence. So one of the first things that we'll often do, depending on the case, is we'll send a letter over to the establishment and we'll say, hey, look, we're going to be filing a formal document with the court. We're going to be asking for a subpoena for your records. We prefer not to do that. Can you give us a copy of those? Or if you are going to be denying that, please preserve the evidence. And we'll go into court and we'll say, hey, we need a motion to preserve this evidence. We need it expedited because this bar's policy is they clear their security tapes every 24 hours. And it's gone. So if we don't get this order done immediately, we may lose access to the evidence. And so something similar is going on here, right? There was a lot of footage, a lot of internal security systems that presumably have a lot of data on them. And so what the Republicans in this letter are saying is, hey, we want you to preserve that stuff. Nothing can be deleted. Stop shredding those documents. Stop trying to, sort of put up walls in between us and our request for that information. And we'll see what happens. It goes on. It says, such information is necessary to properly conduct oversight on the January 6 events. Preservation and production requests were sent to the Sergeant at Arms and the House Chief Administrative Officer, among other legislative agencies, requesting that such information concerning the attack, including correspondence, video footage, audio recordings, other records, be preserved and produced to the relevant committees. In multiple cases, your appointees acting on your behalf have denied requests to produce this information. Okay, just like police departments do. They don't want you to see it. Why not? The response we received was, quote, we regret to inform you that given the scope of the information requested and the concerns implicated by the nature of the request, we are unable to reply with the request at this time. Even more troubling is, despite your House official refusal to comply with the request, we have recently learned that some of the same material we requested was provided to the House Judiciary Committee on a partisan basis. Isn't that nice? This is unacceptable, Madam Speaker. That direction could only have come from you. So playing politics with some of the information, right? So Nancy Pelosi comes out. We want this 9/11 style commission so that we can go and investigate this stuff. The Republicans say, yeah, it's fine. We want to investigate it too. We've already been asking for records. Can you send them over to us? But they have been denied by the House officers that are under the instruction of Nancy Pelosi. Here, the letter wraps up. Lastly, your hyperbolic focus on fabricated internal security concerns has taken critical resources away from the real threat, which is from outside the U.S. Capitol. Your decision to install magnetometers around the House chambers, yet another example of this misdirection and misappropriation, which could be better used to protect us from real confirmed threats. Madam Speaker, you have failed to comply with this requirement yourself. End this political charade and work with us to protect the Capitol and those who work here every day. Signed here by Rodney Davis, ranking member on the Committee on House Administration. We got Jim Jordan, who is the ranking member on the Judiciary Committee. We got James Comer on the Oversight and Reform Committee, and Devin Nunes, the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. So that is in the works, and it looks like we also have, we also have another House representative who wants other questions answered from Nancy Pelosi. So Pelosi comes out, says, we want this commission. We're going to investigate the hell out of this thing. The Republicans, the four that I just mentioned, they send another letter back, says, great, perfect, preserve the evidence. We want to take a look at it as well. And then Jason Chaffetz, who's another congressperson, he was also out, and he's got 13 questions that he wants Miss Pelosi to answer. Let's take a look at them. So, livid about what she calls a failure at the top in the wake of January 6th breach, House Speaker Pelosi insisted that the Sergeant-at-Arms for the House Representatives be fired. He subsequently resigned. Pelosi appointed an interim Sergeant-at-Arms. The Senate made a similar move. Pelosi also called for to fire the chief of the Capitol Police. Mercury News said that Pelosi calls for the resignation of him. Speaker says that either he resigns or she will fire him. Then on a press conference on the 7th, there was a failure at the top of the Capitol Police, and I think Mr. Stephen Sun, he hasn't even called us, so we already heard about that letter. Who is ultimately at the top of the police? Pelosi knows she is, according to this article, which comes from Jason Chaffetz. So he actually wrote this article. This is an opinion piece over on Fox News. He wrote this. Who is at the top? Pelosi is. She and the Senate leader, though they don't manage day-to-day operations, have ultimate authority over Capitol security, and they failed. So if you read the whole article, you're going to see these 13 questions have come up. I'm going to run through them quickly. This is going to look like a wall of text, but we'll get through them quickly. So this is what Jason Chaffetz wants to know from Miss Pelosi. Number one, what was your role in authorizing or denying the National Guard there before and after January 6th? Number two, we got Davis, Jordan, Comer. They asked you 5 pointed questions about your role in January 6th and your compliance with document requests. Will you answer them? Number three, after the 2011 shooting of the now former Representative Gabby Giffords, what changed with regard to security? After the shooting of Republican House Whip Steve Scalise, were there any changes made to security? When that happens, what happens when a member of Congress's life is threatened? How are they expected to protect themselves? Presumably they're talking about guns now in the Capitol building. In 2018, $25,000 was allocated to each member's reimbursement allowance for security. Did that work? Do you have enough cameras in the public spaces inside and outside the Capitol? Why can't law enforcement secure doors in the Capitol, and why isn't there bulletproof glass? Why were known COVID-infected members allowed on the grounds of the Capitol? This is especially relevant given the disparate treatment of Republican Rep. Claudia Tenney's son, a Naval Academy graduate who was denied floor access. You insisted that members should be fined $5,000 if they fail to pass through metal detectors. Should you be fined for not passing through the metal detector? You said the enemy is within. What did you mean, and who specifically are you afraid of in Congress? In Congress, right? If the enemy is within Congress, who is it? How do you respond to the February 1 letter from a former Capitol Police Chief son? Your own home was vandalized this year on January 1. Nobody was arrested. The San Francisco Police Department was quoted saying unidentified suspects had painted graffiti on the garage door and left a pig's head on the sidewalk. How does that happen to the Speaker of the House? All right, so, some of those are good questions. Most of them, I would say, not so much good questions. They're sort of political questions, kind of trying to get a jab in, which we can all appreciate that, right? If you're going to write a letter like this and come up with 13 questions, you certainly want to make sure you get your political skewers in there. But also some very good questions, right? In particular, I'm mostly interested about some of the conversations that were taking place between Nancy Pelosi, between the Sergeant-at-Arms, between the former police chief, between anybody who was involved with maintaining the security of this entire complex. And we'll see where that goes. But I do like the fact that both parties now are in alignment. We're all going to be investigating the hell out of this stuff, which is very, very good. Now, yesterday, we also, on President's Day, President Joe Biden, the duly elected President Joe Biden came out with a statement. He says this on the Senate vote. He actually posted this on the 13th, it looks like. He said it was nearly 2 weeks ago that Jill and I thought this was yesterday. No, this was on the 13th, apparently. So this is a response to Donald Trump's acquittal on the 13th. So that's 3 days ago. I thought this was a President's Day statement. It's not. It's the day before Valentine's Day. He said, the president, it was nearly 2 weeks ago that Jill and I paid our respects to Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick, who laid in honor in the rotunda after losing his life protecting the Capitol from a riotous, violent mob on January 6, 2021. Is that right? All right. Today, 57 senators, 7 Republicans voted to find former Trump guilty for inciting the insurrection. The Senate voted and followed a bipartisan vote to impeach him, while the final vote did not lead to conviction, and it goes on and on. Tonight, I'm thinking about those who bravely stood guard that January day. I'm thinking about all those who lost their lives, all those whose lives were threatened, all those who still today, living with terror, they lived through that day. And I'm thinking about those who demonstrated the courage to protect the integrity of our democracy. Democrats and Republicans, election officials and judges, elected representatives and poll workers before and after the election. That sad chapter in our history has reminded us that democracy is fragile, that it must always be defended, that we must be ever vigilant, that violence and extremism have no place in America, and that each of us has a duty and responsibility as Americans, and especially as leaders, to defend the truth and defeat the lies. So not much there, right? A lot of the political fluff speech that we're all sort of numb to these days. But there was something interesting in that first paragraph. He says that Brian Sicknick, who was the police officer, he's laid in honor at the rotunda. He died. He lost his life protecting the Capitol from a riotous, violent mob on January 6, 2021. And we've talked about that here, right? And I have the utmost respect and empathy and sympathy for the family of Officer Sicknick. I'm so sorry that he's not with us anymore. I am also a little bit concerned that his death is being people are grifting off of it in order to make a political point that is not legitimate. There's no question that he was there defending the Capitol, right? No question about that. But you may recall that we heard for several days afterwards, and this was actually a memorandum, in the memorandum that the Democrats submitted as a part of the impeachment proceeding. They put it in their document that he was killed because he got hit in the head with a fire extinguisher. We played it. I have the slide in a prior show, right? It's in their memo. He was killed by getting hit in the head with a fire extinguisher. Well, that's not true, as far as we can tell. This was posted over from American Greatness. The New York Times retracts the Sicknick story. And so if you go over to the original story, it's sort of a retraction, but here's what they say. Here's this little bit of a juicy nugget here. It says, update, new information has emerged regarding the death of Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick that questions the initial cause of death provided by officials close to the Capitol Police. Right? And it's not something that they've been able to prove. We've talked about this. All of the U.S. Attorney's Office, FBI, Capitol Hill Police, when an officer dies, the law enforcement agencies around this country go into hyperdrive to go make sure that they avenge that officer's death. And I don't have much to say about that. I think that as long as it's investigated and it's legitimate, then that's exactly right. Anytime that the police lose somebody, anytime that anybody in this country loses somebody, I think that there should be a thorough and aggressive investigation. So that wasn't the point that I was trying to make. The point is that there is a massive amount of resources looking into this. Okay, they just didn't forget about Officer Sicknick. They have everybody from multiple different agencies combing through the video, combing through the photographs, scouring social media posts. They've arrested people who were not even there at the Capitol Hill riots that day. They got there the day afterwards. They're in custody. They've seen judges. A lot of people have been arrested. Not everybody. I think they're still looking for several people. But the point is, many people have been arrested, but nobody for the murder of Brian Sicknick. Nobody for throwing a fire extinguisher. None of that. Yet somehow that was national news. That was a headline, one of the headlines over at the New York Times. Officer killed by MAGA mob. Those types of claims were being made. And that's just not really the truth. It was so prevalent that the Democrats literally took it as evidence and submitted it in their impeachment memorandum. But now we're learning that that's not so much the truth. And yesterday, even as of, not yesterday, but the 13th, even Joe Biden was saying that he was killed protecting the Capitol. And we just don't know that yet. So this is sort of, they talk a lot about the big lie. This has been something that is being promulgated through. Now, I could be totally wrong on this thing, but if it comes back out and Brian Sicknick died because of something that was closely related to the Capitol Hill riots, sure, then we can go back and make those claims. But that has not been found yet, and there has been no evidence to support that. And it sounds like 3 different law enforcement agencies have made that same conclusion. And now the New York Times, of course, has to retract it. So this story, as I said, came over from American Greatness. The account of Sicknick's death was first reported as fact, not speculation or rumor, and it made it into the cultural zeitgeist. Okay, everybody's talking about this. Further, it appears that the anonymous source were not law enforcement officials, but people, quote, close to the police department, which means they could have been from anyone. Not only was the Time story untrue, but Sicknick's death was accepted as fact by every news media organization from the Wall Street Journal to the Washington Post. Political pundits on the Never Trump right regurgitated the narrative that Sicknick was, quote, murdered, as did lawmakers on both sides of the aisle. Right? And this article goes on. Of course, this is a biased article. You know, it's going to lean right, but it is saying that the whole point of it was to sort of create more empathy, more. It's a better narrative that Trump MAGA people murdered a police officer. Right? Here are some other things. The House memorandum, the House impeachment managers cited the original January 8th Times article as evidence. They used a news article as evidence in their impeachment memo. Quote, the insurrectionists killed a Capitol police officer by striking him in the head with a fire extinguisher. Those are facts that are not in evidence. Nobody has that justified yet. Nobody has that proven yet. But it's just this constant drip of, what is it, fake news? You want to call it fake news, to use a Trump term? All right. Now, there is also a massive force of troops still in D.C., still hanging out there, and politicians are not happy about that. This came over from the New York Post, written by Ebony Bowden. More Republicans are demanding that House Speaker Nancy Pelosi brief lawmakers on why thousands of National Guard troops are being kept in D.C. until the middle of March. We got Lisa McClain from Michigan, Republican, sits on the House Armed Services Committee, said Pelosi needed to explain why troops are being kept in the nation's capital when the threat from last month's deadly siege has subsided. She says, myself and several colleagues have asked Pelosi for a briefing as to why do we need these troops here. We have received zero information. Zero. More than 26,000 troops were there during the inauguration. U.S. Army officials confirmed at least 5,000 troops would stay in Washington until mid-March. A growing number of Republicans in both chambers are demanding to know why the city is still heavily fortressed when normal government business has resumed. Tom Cotton said in a Fox News op-ed last month that the Guard troops have completed their mission and should be allowed to return home. Military officials have put an estimated cost of the National Guard troops sent to secure D.C. at a stunning $500 million and counting. Okay, it's a lot of troops who can't be doing other things, a lot of money that the country doesn't have. So we'll see how long they continue on with the security charade that they have there in D.C. All right, some other questions that I wanted to leave you with. I posted these over on Locals earlier this morning for supporters of the program. If you already saw these, I apologize, but we're going to go through them quickly. Number one, what is the scope of this investigation? If we're going to be forming a 9/11 style commission, what is the scope of it? What amount of time are you dedicating to each category within the scope? So if you think about this as sort of in law, you sort of get time for certain arguments. You get a 20-minute opening statement. You expect your case in chief to take 4 hours in a small case or 2 weeks in a big case, right? And you got to present all your evidence. And so when you're doing an investigation, when you're doing a presentation, when you're doing an inquiry into something, when you're trying to prove a set of facts, when you're in a court of law where there's some due process and you're trying to tease the facts from the non-facts or from the opinion, well, you got to have some sort of a formal process here. So what does that process look like? What is the scope of the investigation? Nancy Pelosi gave us a little bit in that in her couple sentences in her letter, but what is the scope? And then once we know what the scope is, what type of evidence is admissible? Are they going to be admitting media stories into this? Okay, because we just saw the article from the New York Times was garbage. Are you allowing a direct examination of witnesses? Are you allowing cross-examination by an adverse party? Are these going to be sort of like, regular hearings where you just have like the founder of Facebook comes in and he sits at a table and you just sort of, ask him questions that he just parries away for 4 hours, 6 hours, 10 hours with no real deep dive, no real inquiry. And since this is a political question now, right now, because this is sort of Republicans versus Democrats, are we going to have opposing sides do cross-examination of each other side's witness, of the opposing witnesses? Or is it just kind of a free-for-all? In other words, what's the structure? How is this thing going to be conducted? Are people just allowed to just submit statements? What's the format here? Is there a deliberative process for proposing and accepting witnesses? So as we know, and as some of the Republican members in the minority have brought up, they're stonewalled a little bit. They've made requests for information. They're not getting it according to their claims. Well, the question is, are they going to be able to present the evidence that they want? Are they going to be able to present the witnesses that they want? And if not, why not? The next one I had, is this going to be open for a public viewing? So can the public watch any of this stuff? Is this going to be done behind closed doors or what? What is the role of the Republican Party in the investigation, given that they're the minority party in both houses? We already talked about that. And then a big question I have, what are you going to do with this information? Where will there be criminal charges referred to the DOJ, to the Department of Justice? Are they going to charge people with crimes? What are they doing this inquiry for? I said that this will be framed as a fact-finding inquiry to get to the, quote, truth. The question is, whose truth? Right? So what are we going to be asking for? And then what are we going to do with this information? Are these going to be, well, we found out that Donald Trump is an a-hole, and that's our conclusion? Okay, great. Okay, many people already think that. Don't really need that little data point. We got it. But what about other stuff? Okay, if somebody was grossly negligent here, are there going to be repercussions for them? If somebody was actively malicious, will there be criminal charges for them? Or are we just going to play another month-long spectacle in Congress with a bunch of people bloviating and making a bunch of political points? It doesn't accomplish anything. We just did that. Are we going to do it again? Probably.